Welcome to the closing reflections here in Bergen on the 22nd of July at 10. We have had 3 very long days with some excellent discussions, and I'm certainly very optimistic that we can take the Bergen Plan of Action forward with the support and the excellent debates we have had in the last 3 days. We're going to start the close reflections with a short presentations by Professor Elisabeth Ivarsvatn from the university here, and by Professor Matthew Feldman from CAR. And then we're going to continue the question and answer session with Vanessa Sveback and Björn Ihler as well will join us for that. So I'm not going to take up any more time. So Elisabeth, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mette. So the 3-day International Discussion Forum on Counteracting Extreme Right Terrorism, 22nd July at 10, Commemoration and Commitment, is coming to an end. As a professor of political science at the University of Bergen, I am pleased that my university accepted the call to host this event and that the top figures of the government of the city of Bergen participated so generously. I would like to thank the Khalifa Ihler Institute and the Center for the Analysis of the Radical Right, Björn Ihler and their leaders, Björn Ihler, Matthew Feldman, and my colleague, Professor Erik Tonning, for their leading roles in putting together this excellent program. They have made sure and you who have participated have made sure that Bergen during these last 3 days has been has hosted one of the most important global conversations happening at present. What can we, as societies, organizations, institutions of research and education, governments, international organizations, and technology companies do to counteract terrorism and violent extremism? For me, as I'm sure for many, the most powerful moment during these 3 days was the testimony of Miss Vanessa Sveback, who told us about the loss of her 14-year-old daughter in the terror attack on the youth camp of the Labour Party at Utøya in Norway 10 years ago, on the 22nd of July, 2011. This is what it's about. It's about preventing the meaningless loss of innocent life, and it is about protecting democratic citizenship. The democratic citizenship of young people exercising their democratic right to participate in a center-left political party. The 22nd of July terrorists, just like the terrorists elsewhere that he inspired in New Zealand and the UK, all strongly believed in the most common right-wing extremist ideology today, the conspiracy theory that is untrue that Muslims and political actors on the left conspire to bring down our civilization, and that this is such an imminent threat that action outside of the democratic rules are needed, that terrorism is needed. More concretely, this meeting has, of course, been about following up the international efforts established in the aftermath of the Christchurch terror attacks on New Zealand, the Christchurch call to action. The question posed of all actors was as follows: what are you doing to embed, enact, and extend the Christchurch call to which you are party? At the table have been the leading technology companies, Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, that is sort of an organization that they have created, the leading international bodies for regulating this area, the United Nations Counterterrorism Committee, the European Union's Internet Forum, leading government representatives from New Zealand, the UK, and the US, some academics, and not least several civil society organizations, Tech Against Terrorism, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, Center for the Analysis of the Radical Right, Moonshoot, and the Khalifa Ihler Institute. What has become very clear to me as a professor and a researcher who's had the privilege to listen in and contribute to the discussion over these past few days is that the Christchurch terror attacks really became a pivotal moment for global counterterrorism efforts because of the global leadership provided by New Zealand's Prime Minister at the time. But also it did become pivotal because of the way that all of those present here today responded to the call that was issued and came in good faith to support the Christchurch call to action. Again and again, we've heard about these few days about the importance of a comprehensive, a multi-stakeholder, and all of society approach. These are all words that mean the same thing, at least to my ears. And I think it's a reason why this is being emphasized. And two of those are very obvious. The first is that the terrorist threat we're all facing is transnational in nature. So there is no single authority that can be called upon to regulate or enforce in this area. International collaboration is needed. And another reason why we need to come together across sectors is the technical nature of some of the counter-terrorism measures required, where we all need contributions from technology companies. And I would like to emphasize the third reason, and that is, at least in my mind, the goal in the end is broad-based public resilience against violent extremist ideology. And what that means, at least from the way I see it, is that every actor that comes on board matters. It matters that we're a broad and diverse coalition of actors, makes counterterrorism measures more effective. And actually, it should not be hard at all to come on board for any good faith democratic actor, any good faith democratic organization or citizen, because we're talking here about protecting and enforcing fundamental democratic values, that we resolve conflicts and difference peacefully through agreed upon procedures, that we do not demonize, threaten, or bully political opponents or other fellow citizens, and that we're good losers, respecting outcomes of votes, be they popular or in parliament, even if we lose. So reaching out and bringing on board a diverse range of actors and organizations and keeping the conversation going and building consensus about classifiers, prescriptions, designations, lists, but also to keep the discussion going about how to deal with illegal and harmful content online from a technical point of view, from a civil society point of view, and from a regulator's point of view, and from an enforcer's point of view. All these things are important, and they're not easy. And we need to constantly be asking ourselves, who should do what and when? So how far away are we from where we need to be? Well, the answer is, I'm really sorry to tell you, very far away. And that is not to take away from all the really terrific efforts that we've learned about these 3 days. Companies are developing their own standards. They're taking steps to moderate content, to respond to reports of breach of standards. They're closing accounts, and they have come up with this thing called hashes that sounds very promising. And we've learned how the EU Internet Forum have stepped up their regulatory efforts to enforce the principle that what is illegal offline also is illegal online. And we've learned about the UK government's impressive ongoing efforts that appear pioneering when it comes to regulation in this area. And we've heard about intensifying efforts in the US. And not least, we've heard from a great range of civil society organizations who are extremely knowledgeable and work tirelessly on our behalf to remind us to keep focus, to remind us that terrorism has real human victims, to remind us of what is not being done. There is no current plan to require that more than 200 terrorist websites be taken down. The recommendation algorithms are not transparent. We need somebody outside of the technological industry and somebody outside of the governments to keep pushing us forward in this area. And these organizations do that in an excellent way. And they also invent and spread knowledge about new forms of intervention. And we've also seen, and I'm coming to an end now, in a way that I've been told in the breaks here is not so common, that academia steps up in these few days here in Bergen. and in particular, several research groups and colleagues here at the University of Bergen, who have facilitated both meetings and participated actively. Well, I, for one, firmly believe that countering terrorism in the long run necessitates solid education in the long run. And necessitates solid education at all levels, schools through universities, about extreme ideologies and the harm that they do, about the arts and procedures of democratic citizenship, and about digital literacy, to take just 3 examples we've discussed. So the job before us is immense, but what the events these 3 days have reminded us, I think, very forcefully, is that we cannot choose not to do it. That is what ultimately this forum and commemoration of those who lost their lives 10 years ago in Norway remind us. So now it is up to all those who are present here in Bergen and who listen to these remarks either live or in recording to take the next step. Thank you.
Late in the day. Thank you so much, Professor Iversflaten, for the excellent summary of our days, of the conversations, the discussions we have had, and your reflections on those, and at the end for your suggestions. We will wait with the questions for you from the floor, and hand straight over to Professor Feldman.
Thanks. I'd also like to send my thanks to Elizabeth for those very moving words and for her powerful contribution right through our 3 days together. And I'd also really like to start with an event 30 months ago that was New Zealand's darkest day. On that day, the 15th of March, 2019, we know that a terrorist live streamed an attack that truly shocked the world and claimed 51 innocent victims, with another 50 injured, many of whom with life-threatening injuries. And it has to be said, the response was transnational, and it was immediate, and it was welcome. We know that very quickly GIFCT was refounded. We know that the Christchurch Call within 8 weeks was launched, and we know that it became, thanks to many other countries' efforts, it became something that was placed on the agenda of the United Nations. Those are all welcome and necessary steps in response to a terrorist attack. In short, they helped to remove the terrorist video and manifesto from the mainstream platforms, and that is only right. But that was just a horrific variation on a theme that had been well established by that time. At the other end of the decade, a terrorist in Norway exploited the internet to go entirely through the terrorist cycle online, from Google Maps for surveillance and digital weapons purchases, to the propagandistic exploitation of this unspeakable act in the dissemination of a 1,500-page manifesto and 12.5-minute video. To this day, 10 years on, at this event where we commemorate the victims of Utøya and Oslo, we know that 2 out of every 3 survivors to this day cannot live normal lives. And that's before we start talking about the many generations whose lives have been ripped apart by this terrorist actions. And so in associating myself not just with what Elizabeth said, but with the sentiments of this conference, I ask you that if it's right, 10 years on, that literally 3 clicks away, the terrorist manifesto remains online on the mainstream platforms. And I ask again, how can this be right that these material are literally clicks away? Here is a search first for the manifesto itself. As you can see, the very first pages bring up the manifesto. Obvious, easily findable. We also find the same for the video, and it's not a single platform, it is all the platforms. And I think that this shows that we all still need to do more, and that we all still need to embrace, embed, and extend the vital principles at the other end of the decade that guided the Christchurch call. Then, as now, we need to change the internet for better, for good. This, of course, is the aim of the Bergen Plan of Action. And I'm going to just highlight a couple of elements which I feel are most relevant to the events of the last few days, where we've talked about the urgent need for reform. We've come together to stake out the future and to renew our commitment to our joint global efforts to combat terrorism in all its form in practical ways. This is of necessity collaborative work through the establishment of global networks, collaborative institutions, and indeed policies that strive towards the goal of combating global terrorism in a manner that is respectful of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We also know that online platforms, governments, transnational organizations, and civil society groups have a shared and interdependent responsibility to the users and citizens in governing our online public spaces. In governing these spaces, the policies determined by private sector companies impacts more individuals than the policies of any single government in human history. And so it is time for us to take concrete steps, actions that are forward-looking, while at the same time commemorating the victims who were murdered on behalf of extreme right-wing ideology. And those actions we suggest are fivefold, and they have been endorsed both by transnational organizations and key government players on the global stage. First, to invoke and apply a tougher and more comprehensive approach to incitement of violent extremism and terrorism that are rooted in principles of universality. That necessitates a genuine whole of society approach. Second, to establish a college of moderators to increase the transparency and accountability surrounding the practice of moderation of violent extremist content. Again, never losing sight of the value of human rights. Third, to establish a rapid response task force that by invitation can support local or national authorities in limiting the disastrous impact of terrorist attacks and activities. Fourth, establish a global hub for collaboration to provide support for civil society organizations and in support of their efforts to contribute to a safer internet for all of us. And finally, fifth, establish a tech innovation fund to produce technologies rooted in best practice research and analysis with the goal of supporting those four aims above. Taken very simply, this is a call for resource, for collaboration, for knowledge transfer, and where necessary, upskilling, and as Elizabeth said, for public resilience and ultimately the defense of democracy. In short, we can and must do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for sharing the Bergen Plan of Action and for the brutal reminder of why it's important. I think before we invite Björn and Vanessa, I'll let you and Elizabeth check if you have any comments or questions to each other.
Well, if I can, excuse me, if I could just raise one point to Elizabeth that I thought was profound and one that really caught both of our attentions, very brief, is that we know it's not just, as I think Jacob Davies said, the very tip of terrorist violence. For example, lone actor terrorist violence. Even if they are carried out by lone actors, there is a much wider network of support. And we are trying to put in place policies and understandings that can tackle that underpinning extremist current. But what happens if some of those extremist networks of support or groups find some local or even national representation? Do we simply then say, this is now a matter for the court of public opinion? So my question to you is something that I think you drove home in your opening remarks, which is what happens when extremist groups are elected?
Well, we're pretty actually defenseless if they are. That's the truth of the matter. So we have to work in a multifaceted way to ensure they're not. But I'm also going to suggest that even actors who may not be subscribing directly to an extreme right ideology can serve a very harmful role in the efforts to counter right-wing extremism in particular, actually. So I'm all in favor of having a universalistic framework for working, countering terrorism and extremism, but there is a particular problem of right-wing extremism, especially in many established democracies these days, and that's the support, if not directly, then indirectly, that they receive from the far right in parliament. And so, and the way that works is that in order for these counter-terrorism measures to be effective, we need a consensus. It can't be politicized. So the minute you have, and I think we see that this very clearly in the US, particularly at the moment, the danger of any of these things becoming politicized, it really decreases the possibility of going forward. So I think insisting on commitment to basic democratic procedures, I think is necessary and required over and over again. And I think that's because it matters actually much more if the far right says, well, do you know what? This particular conspiracy theory that the Muslims and the left are going to bring down our civilization is actually not true. If they say that, it matters much, much more than if I say it or you say it or somebody else says it. So it actually can help in preventing people from going on a path of radicalization. So the fact that they're refusing to do so and instead saying, oh, it's all a matter of freedom of speech is very harmful, actually, to these kind of radicalization processes. So I'm not saying that that is the gist of the problem. I think what we've learned during these days is when we're talking about regulation and stuff that will be taken off, and what we're talking about is indisputably illegal content that isn't being fought. But I'm talking more about the general leadership and a general democratic spirit, which I think we should all be requiring of. And my point is, we shouldn't just be requiring it of one side or the other side. We should just be requiring it of all. And it's just simply not okay to treat other political parties that you disagree with as some sort of enemy. It's just not democratic. It's not the democratic spirit. So I don't think one should do that. And I think we should have a discussion about it, because I think our democracies aren't complete. Just because things were possible, 50 years ago doesn't mean that they were right. So we need to have this discussion continually. I think we need to up our stakes and be a little bit more bold. As in now, I'm not talking about law enforcement. I'm talking about generally how we conduct ourselves and what kind of things we require of our opponents, and we can of our various sort of the politicians that are discussing, etc., etc. There are lots of things one can do there, and moderate actors on the left and right play a big role, and I think it would really matter if the far right would step up and just say that this conspiracy theory is just not true.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Are we ready for Björn and Vanessa to join us, or do you have a question to Matthew directly before we do that? Okay, when I've gathered some questions already, and so I'm going to start with Vanessa Sveback. Thank you so much for being here and for participating these days. It's you've been very, very good to have to remind us what it's all about, remembering the victims, as well as the intellectual side of things. And I just wondered if you could share some of your reflections on what you have been part of in these last 3 days, and what you take away from it, please.
Can you hear me? Yep, good. Awesome. First, I want to thank you for the invitation to attend this very important summit. I have listened, I have observed. For those that don't know where I'm originally from, I am originally from New Zealand, half Norwegian, as you can tell. But I'm an old-fashioned Kiwi. During these last 3 days, I've taken over 60 pages of notes. I feel both inspired and engaged. But to be completely honest, I'm also frustrated, and at times I've felt, mildly put, furious. I've been advocating on behalf of my daughter's memory for the last 10 years. Basically from the night that she went missing to the days that we waited for her until the moment the police knocked on our door and told us that she had been killed. I've been advocating on behalf of my daughter's memory so that she doesn't become a statistic that we only mention at commemorations or at the beginning of well-meaning speeches. My daughter was a lived life, maybe only 14 years and 5 days long, but her life meant the world to us, and everyone that's still 10 years on miss her. Her grandparents, her sisters, me, her mum, and her dad. To illustrate the impact on a family, if one victim has 2 parents, 2 sets of grandparents, perhaps 2+ siblings, aunts and uncles, one victim will have at least 10 to 20 family members that are personally affected by the brutal death of a loved one by terrorism. 77 people, mainly children, were killed on July the 22nd, while almost 1,000 people survived the attacks in Oslo and on the island. In 2011, we estimated then that approximately 10,000 Norwegians from all over Norway were personally affected by the attacks. Matt, in his general comments, said quite simply, "It is time to act." I am frustrated by the general lack of understanding for the urgency of action, not to understate the fact that we are all here with a common goal, but we need to commit. In the last 10 years, we haven't been able to prevent other terrorist attacks from happening. More families have joined my ranks. This isn't a lifestyle choice, people. This is a horrendous group to belong to. I've spoken with bereaved families here in Norway, New Zealand, the UK, the United States, India, Australia, and I could list up all the countries, but from literally all over the world. The list is long. It's too long. 1 in 3 bereaved families in Norway have been unable to go back to work. They are still suffering 10 years on from trauma and PTSD. Our health care workers have done an amazing job, but more needs to be done, not just domestically, but on an international scale to continue to support the victims of terrorism. The ideals that we have, quite frankly, when it starts to fade from our memories, those things that are supposed to be in place, quite frankly, aren't. The consequences of the terrorist attacks have a rippling effect that can still be felt decades later. I am humbled by the sentiments that have been sent to me and my family personally over the last 3 days, and to the bereaved families that have lost loved ones in Norway and in my birth country of New Zealand. I would like particularly to say thank you to Matt, to Mithta, to Eric, and to Elizabeth for your collaboration on the summit. I feel very privileged to know you, and I'm inspired by your work. You all give me hope for the future. It has been truly an honour to participate in this summit, to stand together in particular with Björn, who I've known for the last 10 years. And Björn, my friend, I am so extremely proud of you and the work that you have been doing. Kia kaha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. That's very moving, and we certainly do need to commit. So thank you for hammering that in again. I just thought maybe we should move straight over to you, Björn, and ask you to summarize your thoughts on the discussion over the last 3 days, but also you might want to say something about the issues that Vanessa raised. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mette, and thank you, Vanessa, for your words. They add so much weight to the incredible importance of the work that is being done. As you mentioned, we've known each other for 10 years, and the reason we know each other is obviously unfortunate would be an understatement. It is terrible. At the same time, having the pleasure of knowing you at this point is something that gives me strength in the work that we are all doing to try to push the agenda of countering terrorism everywhere further. And I am incredibly thankful to you for your assistance over the last 3 days, as well as your friendship and support over the last 10 years in that work. Today, for me, marks the culmination in many ways of those 10 years. 10 years of incredibly hard work. One of the things I set out to do pretty immediately in the aftermath of the terrorist attack in 2011 was to understand how our society, our community had been a breeding ground for someone like Breivik. How could we allow, as Norwegians, for someone to go that far, to become a mass murderer and a terrorist in the most horrendous way? The unfortunate fact is that we haven't stopped producing terrorists, and this is true for countries everywhere. It is also true for Norway. Norway is quite often viewed as a peaceful utopia in many ways, and in many ways it is. It is by far a great country. At the same time, it is important to remember that Norway in 2019 had another terrorist attack in which one person was murdered, the adopted Asian sister of another far-right extremist who then went on to try to attack the local mosque where he was overpowered. This shows an incredible failure in our efforts to prevent terrorism in the aftermath of 2011, and it's baffling how short we've come. We have fallen short in our efforts to prevent the radicalization of other neo-Nazis and far-right extremists here in Norway, but we have also been unable to conduct these efforts in any adequate way globally. And I think Christchurch for many was eye-opening, although their eyes should already have been open since 2011. And so it is frustrating that we need to see attack and attack again before actual action is taken. Thus, while this event and this meeting has been commemorative of the victims of the terrorist attack here in Norway in 2011, it is also a forward-looking meeting or plan of action that Matthew read out part of earlier is not a plan that looks backwards, but a plan that looks forwards to what needs to be done in order to adequately address the problem, in order to prevent terrorism, and in order to support local communities that are being affected by terrorism. We're not going to end terrorism overnight. There's going to be other attacks, but what we do need to do is to make sure that when those attacks happen, they do not have the same impact, neither on the bereaved families, nor on the survivors, nor on the global scale that the 2011 terrorist attack has had. Unfortunately, the attack in 2011 here has inspired a multitude of attacks around the world through the spread of the manifesto that Breivik wrote and that Matthew showed how easy it is to currently access. And by limiting the access to this, by limiting the spread of inspiration among terrorists, we hope we can limit the scope of the issue of terrorism in the first place. At the same time, it is incredibly important that when terrorist attacks do happen, as they do, we are prepared and we know how to deal with those attacks in order to limit the ripple effects and the impact that they are having. And thus, the Joint Rapid Response Task Force element of our plan to action is a key point, not only in supporting the communities that are being affected, but also in combating terrorism globally. And ultimately, that is our goal, to combat terrorism globally, to create a world in which democratic values are being honored, as Elizabeth touched upon, in which we understand that democracy is not just about our right to vote or about our freedom to express hateful messages that also inspire terrorism. It's not about fundamentalism that steps on the toes of the rights to life, to liberty, and to dignity of our fellow human beings. It is on the opposite end about protecting those rights, protecting the right to life that your daughter Vanessa was robbed of, that my friends were robbed of in 2011, and that so many people have been robbed of in terrorist attacks around the globe since then. And it's time for that to stop. And thus, it's really time for us to step it up and to act. And so, as this is the culmination of a decade's worth of work for me, I look forward to this new chapter where I can go forward with this plan of action and really push forward in my own work, but I also invite my friends from across the field of countering terrorism, as well as from a multitude of other fields, to join in that process. We need academia, we need the social media companies, we need the tech sector, we need all of the people who have been present in the meeting over the last few days, but we also need so many other people. We need people from the financial sectors, from the organizational sectors, from a multitude of sectors around the world to join together in our effort to fight back, to say that enough is enough and that terrorism is not acceptable. And so we joined forces in our effort to take this work further, to make sure that we don't lose people to meaningless, senseless attacks like the one we saw here in 2011.
Thank you very much, Björn, for your sharing your thoughts and for your relentless energy in combating terrorism. I will now open up for the rest of the participants to ask questions to all of you who have spoken here, or the speakers here. So please just put your hand up or put a message in the chat. Okay, maybe the speakers have any questions to each other again. Oh, are we so exhausted now? This is oh, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that to make sure that at the end of this conference, as we reaffirm the need to act and the reasons to do so, that we also take a moment to really, or at least I feel as sort of one of the representatives of the host here, to say that how incredibly impressed and touched I've been by all those who have accepted the invitation to come and take part, and all the incredible work that they're doing, because it's not their fault that we're not, that we haven't, you know, that we're not where we need to be. quite to the contrary, right? We've learned about all these efforts that really do bring us closer. And so what we're emphasizing here is just not the fact that these things have been in vain at all. And I think this has been very clear throughout, that the Christchurch call to action has been tremendous, and the other kinds of organizations and mechanisms that have revolved around it have been tremendous and important. And so it's to really drive home, if I understand it correctly, both what Matt and Björn and Vanessa have said, this desire that really we need to step up this effort, but following in the footstep and with the help of all of these friends in this fantastic network that has gathered here. And of course, it is touching, and I know Vanessa's told me that it's touching to see how the types of people who've attended here today, and all these few days, and also I just want to make sure each and everyone who's still here and really know that that's something that we warmly appreciate.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We still have some minutes left. We don't have to fill them, but I know that Matthew has a slide he wants to share with us, and but the floor is still open if people want to ask. Are you there, Matthew, with your final slide?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'll just share my screen. And really, this is despite the upsetting content that we've all been exposed for, it's a happy moment for me to be able to thank our sponsors and partners in the hosting of this event. So the first really goes to our colleagues and friends at the University of Bergen. It also goes to the city of Bergen. We had councillors and the mayor, a number of other dignitaries that were able to join us. It also goes to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Norway, and also to our colleagues in New Zealand. We were also joined by the UN Counterterrorism Executive Committee Directorate, the EU Internet Forum, and of course the Global Internet Forum on Counterterrorism. We're especially grateful to a number of leading stakeholders, Liz Thomas at Microsoft, Dina Hussein at Facebook, Patrick Woody at Twitter, and Lucy Calladine at Google, all of whom were willing to present and discuss with us a number of the pressing problems that we face. But it wasn't just private companies, transnational organizations. We really did have, I think, some quite humbling support from the British Home Office, Dr. Richard Thompson, Ofcom, Dr. Murtaza Sheikh, and the US State Department. And I say this, really with a full heart as an American. Dr. Sherry Clark got up really early this morning and has been with us all day. And I'm as humbled and honored by that as an American citizen as perhaps anything that's ever happened to me in my life. We also had a concluding session with Tech Against Terrorism, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and Moonshot that really concentrated our minds about what needs to be done. I don't think I need to share with you the enormity of my gratitude and all of the organizers' gratitude to Vanessa for sharing her personal experiences and for helping us to remember what this is really all about. It's about defending human life and defending democracy. And on a personal note, but also on behalf of the organizers, we had enormous buy-in and help that oftentimes goes unremarked from the technical support of people, from the willingness of everyone to put their shoulder to the wheel. Dr. Meta Wiggin, Maisie Draper, Maddie Cannon were absolutely superstars, all affiliated with CAR. But also Miriam Fanine, who works with Bjorn at the Khalifa Eiler Institute, Eric Tunning here from the University of Bergen. All of these people, they did it for free. They did it because they care, and they did it to make this conference possible. And I really can't thank them all enough. So I'll stop there, but I really do want to just send my heartfelt thanks, not just to my American compatriots, but to all of you for taking this with the seriousness it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. We have some questions here or comments. Eric first.
Thank you. I was actually really just joining the acknowledgements and thanks, and as organizer of this event, it's been amazing to see this kind of initiative to come together, and I want to thank Car and Califa and especially Vanessa as well for coming and all of the organizations involved. And I also want to thank my many colleagues at the University of Bergen who helped make this happen. The support of Rector Margaret Hagen, who's very important. My dean in the humanities faculty, various people in the communications department and IT. And of course the Aula technical team, and it's really shown me in a new way as well what this university can do when it's really prepared to engage with really important social issues of our time on a high level at speed, and it's really been very, very impressive indeed.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you. Björn, if you have your hand up, or is that a legacy hand?
Oh, as the third co-organizer of this, I felt like I have to echo Matthew and Eric in their acknowledgement of the incredible effort that has gone into this from all of the listed stakeholders. I also want to thank you, Mette, for in many ways being the initiator of this event in collaboration with Matthew. When you two first called me and proposed we do something to commemorate the 22nd of July, I had no idea what we would be able to grow it to, and I am incredibly honored and impressed by your work and your commitment to support these efforts as well. And I hope we have among ourselves found friends and allies that will join forces in bringing the plan of action forth and pushing for the execution of it as well. I also want to acknowledge that it's about a week and a half since I first called Vanessa to ask her to participate in this, and it is incredible how on incredibly short notice in the middle of summer, which in Norway is a time when basically everyone is unreachable due to being on a mountain somewhere, we have been able to work together to create something truly incredible with buy-in from some truly incredible people, from Assistant Secretary Generals at the United Nations level to leading diplomats and bureaucrats within the European Union, within numerous governments, and leading people within the field as a whole, as well as within the private sector companies that we have been collaborating with. And so I have no doubt that this constellation of people will be able to deliver on the points of action that constitutes the plan of action.
Thank you very much, Björn. It's been an honor working with you, and it's wonderful to hear you being so optimistic. So unless there are any more questions or comments, I think we stop here. Yeah. Thank you very much, Bergen. It's beautiful here, and I hope everybody have a very, very good and relaxing weekend after this. So thank you very much.